Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of, once again, the single greatest podcast in all of human history, Armchair E&G with Nathan Yates. I'm Director of Communications at AliESG, Rob Yates. And with me, as always, my partner in crime, our head of product, Nate Najjar. Nate, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Good to be back, getting back into a rhythm with these. And then joining us, we're excited to have our intrepid leader, CEO, Ben Webster. How's it going, Ben?
It's going great. It's a Monday, but I'm good with Mondays. So many amazing things are going on, so I'm happy to be here and excited for an amazing week.
So I feel you there. I love Mondays. Tuesdays can be disappointing because then like if Monday didn't go well, you're like, well, there goes the promise of the
But
week. But
but aren't Mondays always going well with us
oh, high
lately?
promise. It has been a very good series of Mondays and weeks. And actually that's a good segue into our topic today, because 2 Mondays ago we were all flying in and getting ready for the Council of Institutional Investors Fall Conference. So a little bit different than perhaps our normal pure ESG topics of discussion on the podcast, but this is where a lot of the leaders of the biggest institutional investors, particularly in the US, but represented globally, come together and talk about the issues that occur to them. And there's this huge series of discussions, people on panels, you have directors, you have academics, you have experts, you have other lead investors coming in. So for me, it was my first CII conference, though I'd almost attended a few a long, long time ago. Long, uninteresting stories, and for no reason worth discussing, it didn't work out. But what did you all think of it? What was your first impression just getting to CII?
Yeah, Ben, go ahead. I'd let you get your first thought.
Yeah, I thought CI was a great event. ESG started to become really popular, and once the investment industry started looking at it, right? And I would say once there was a lot of research papers that started to come out about a decade ago about how positive or how do you say relatively higher ESG scores than your peers seemed to indicate companies that would outperform in the longer term, right? A lot of a lot of that research was less about stock price at the time, but more about operational alpha, for example, at businesses. But once Wall Street kind of got the idea in your head that ESG could be correlated with outperformance, it just became extremely popular. And so a lot of the conferences we go to are often conferences, investment conferences about risk and return, alpha, and all of that. And while those topics interest me, they are not my area of expertise per se, and nor are they kind of on the highest level of interest to actually my personal passions. What I liked about CII is that a lot of it has to do with governance and stewardship, and how do you as an investor um, work with companies to ensure that they govern themselves well, to ensure that they are executing on their principles, and maybe from an E and S perspective, you know, are they voting according to guidelines of how they decide they wanted to operate, how they want to make an impact. And similarly, investors, they want to make an impact and influence how these companies operate. And that's actually an inherently more interesting topic to me. The people at CII are, because of that, very influential people. They influence how companies operate in the world, and how companies operate in the world has significant impact on the world itself. So it's just, for me, it was just very interesting, and the people are very interesting because of that.
Yeah, I found it the same way. I think there were so many investors, but there were also law firms represented there, lawyers. It was always interesting. I think I met a lawyer at the first intro, whatever the cocktail reception at the beginning, and that was always interesting to see what they're looking at from an ESG perspective in terms of advising their clients on how to approach this space. So I thought that was a very a very interesting dimension to to institutional investors is how their legal teams are looking at all the concerns around ESG. So I agree with Ben. It was interesting to see just the different practices, even within institutional investing. The nuances there, what people were looking at, and what they needed in terms of information in order to make the best decision. So it was a great time.
It really is sort of a coming together of all these, I don't want to say competing interests, but competing priorities in the investment world, and seeing some sort of juxtaposition how the governance, the stewardship, the fiduciary responsibilities, the legal challenges, and it all comes into play. And then coming back to Al, is we're trying to provide, it's validating what we're trying to provide. So here's the best data you can get, sort of at your fingertips, with the quickest response time, the freshest data. So as these things are happening for investors, we are really giving our clients what they need to be able to move forward in this space. So along those lines, talking about our clients, is there one or a few particularly interesting people you met that you want to give a quick shout out?
I guess I met a lot of interesting people.
Yeah.
So part of this podcast, though, we want to inform, we also potentially want to entertain, and so I guess I'll tell you a little bit about a conversation I had that gave me a nice little chuckle. I met an individual from BlackRock. His name is Alec Castellanos. He think he was a new member, so I met him at the new member mixer. And I think his title is Director of Investment Stewardship at BlackRock. Anyway, we just had a funny conversation. The people on this podcast will know that I love to cook, and I like me some good dad jokes. And I get a lot of the recipes I cook and a lot of the dad jokes I like to tell from a TikTok feed. My kids got me into TikTok during the coronavirus. So anyway, I do get some politics on TikTok, and I do seem to get, for whatever reason, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, a number of conspiracy theory related things that pop up in my feed. And one of the recurring conspiracy theories that appears on TikTok is how there are 3 companies that secretly run the whole world. They own about 90 or whatever % of all major corporations, and these being BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street.
They are the largest shareholder themselves, like Larry Fink is BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. These 3 companies are the largest shareholders of 88% of S&P 500 companies. Let me say that one more time. You got 500 companies, S&P 500, 88% of those companies, their largest shareholder of those companies is either State Street, Vanguard, or BlackRock. So whose phone call do you think you have to pick up when they call you? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Who do you fear if you're the CEO of those companies? State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock. You better answer those calls. Who are you going to hire? You're going to have to hire whoever they're going to want you to hire because you want the high score.
And those videos always piss me off because it comes from such a high level of ignorance and stupidity that I can't believe it. And what these people don't realize is these 3 firms don't own all these companies. They sell ETFs. They're the biggest ETF firms, right? And so iShares, Spiders, I don't know what Vanguard's ETFs are called, if there's like a brand name. But at the end of the day, these ETFs do own large shares of a lot of public companies, but BlackRock or Vanguard or State Street don't own those ETFs. It's actually, for the most part, it's individual investors that have parked their money in those ETFs, and it's individual investors which control those companies. How this relates to Alec is, I think he's building some sort of pass-through voting software at BlackRock, which will actually enable those individual investors to vote their shares in the ETFs. What's done traditionally in the mutual fund or ETF industry is usually the sponsors of those funds are the vote on behalf of the investors that own those ETFs. So I just thought it was funny because I told Alec that he was the person secretly who controls the world, and we kind of both had like a moo-ha-ha-ha moment type of chuckle. So that was a fun conversation. It's one of the conversations I'll remember. So I just like laughing. So that was a good conversation.
So BlackRock seems to be the theme, because I met somebody from BlackRock too. Ben was talking to him and introduced me, and said, "Hey, there's this podcast that Nate's part of called Nate and Yates." He goes, "Yeah, I know. I've heard about it." And I thought, huh? Wow, maybe they do know
I told you,
everything.
best podcast in all time.
So I said, I'm sure Rob has something to do with that. But I was genuinely surprised, and then like, wow, he's heard of our podcast. Like, okay, that's interesting. So anyway, I think what I'm talking about. But it was just I wasn't expecting him to say that when we were meeting each other. So anyway.
So for me, it was more catching. I mean, I met some new interesting people from Voya, from the New York Comptroller's office, but I caught up with some people I haven't seen in a while. So catching up with Ed Apsey, who is the co-head of ESG engagement and stewardship at CIBC. I've known Ed for a very long time. I've known his wife, his family for a very long time. His cousin, I actually don't know the direct relationship, cousin, nephew, something like that, but he was one of the first people I ever hired to work for me. And I remember when Ed's son was born, he remembers when my daughter was born, and just talking about, like, we've got teenagers now and catching up, but then still having this conversation that sort of drifts back into, like, look at where governance was 20 years ago, look where it is now. Certainly there's a long way to go, but we're really seeing some positive improvement, and it's validating to what we're doing. I don't know, that went a long way for me. And then just following up on that, what struck me is how well done the conference was, not just in terms of the sessions, because they're CII. It's not like, I'm not knocking it. They did a very good job with the sessions, but it's easy to get good people to come in and do CII, right? But it was all run so smoothly. Like, stuff was ready, food was great, it was optimized for conversation. You were never unsure about where to be. Staff was on top of everything. They were super helpful, and just like meeting the people, Melissa Fader at CII. I mean, I don't know how she does it. Like, she's superwoman, but keeping it all balanced and still having time to, like, catch up and chat with people. I ran into Glenn Davis, president over at CII. He was the first person who ever hired me back at the Investor Responsibility Research Center. Something I won't even say how long ago, because I don't want to age myself. But yeah, overall, just a really, really good catch up from a personal perspective.
Nice.
Did you all so I talked about the flow of the thing and the outstart, but what about the sessions? Was there a favorite session? I think Nate and I have the favorite session. We've discussed this a little bit, so I'm trying to think of a backup. But
I mean, I don't know if this is the one, because I haven't talked to you about the favorite session, but I like the generative AI and the business transformation session. That's probably the one you're thinking about, right? I thought it was just pretty cool. I mean, AI is touching everything, right? And so obviously it was a big topic of the day. Even not in that session, it's never far from people's lips when they're talking about, what's going on and the problems they're trying to solve, right? Because I think everybody knows that AI is gonna transform every single industry, and they know if they don't get ahead of it and try to figure out how it's going to transform or disrupt their industry, that they can get left by the wayside. So, there was some, very interesting discussions there. Like, for example, I think someone from the Writers Guild of America, as we know, the writers are on strike in Hollywood. And, one of the important points that person was making is, well, if you're a celebrity or someone, and someone's calls you in, and you do an hour session doing something, then they could, if they slip in the contract, oh, we have the rights to your image, etc., then they could use it for everything from then on, right?
Yep.
And I do know, I was at a ESG conference in London, ESG FinTech conference, and the Responsible Investment Conference in London a few months ago. And I got in late one night, and there was, I was getting ready for bed, and I just turned on the TV, and all of a sudden I saw Idris Elba and Kim Kardashian living in the same house, and then Ariana Grande and someone else living in a different house, and they had normal jobs in London, and it was this reality show, and I'm like, what is going on here? And it turned out it was a generative AI show, and I researched it online. They did not, the owner of the writer and the producer of the show admitted it in our, yeah, we do not have permission to use their likenesses, but it's our stance that we have the right to do it. They're in the public domain, right? So this is just a huge, a huge topic at hand, and obviously it's going to change governance. It's going to change proxy. It's going to change ESG in huge ways as well. Anyway, what did you guys think about it?
Yeah, so the guy that was, I think you're talking about, he's from SAG. He was the chief negotiator. Duncan Crabtree Ireland
SAG,
is his name.
Yep.
But he's the chief negotiator, and he's the one that had exactly what you're talking about, using people's image and likeness. And he was really passionate about having those discussions and making sure that things are set in stone, right? Because, this could go down. He was the one, I think it was the most, not afraid, but the most, not even skeptical, but really the one that was trying to say, we need to figure this out before it really gets out of hand in terms of, how we protect people's work, right? And he was saying, well, AI uses work that people have put out there, right? So whether it's copyright or books or whatever, AI is using that. So it was a very fascinating conversation with him. And then the other people on the panel, it was a very good panel in the back and forth, and some of the views where they disagreed, that was interesting. And I think one of the biggest disagreements is one person said, good luck trying to get somebody with AI expertise on your board. That's a long way off. There's not a lot of people that could do that. And the other person was saying, no, you need to start today to find that person and put that AI expert on your corporate board. And that was an interesting discussion between those two. So yeah, the whole session was great. So
yeah, I think they're trying to talk about, like, hey, it's like good governance to have someone with AI experience on your corporate board, because governance is changing everything. Well, I don't disagree that that's a good practice, probably, to have a healthy governance. I at the same time, I don't know, how many AI experts are there at this point in time that are not just programmers. These are people who it's the crux is, we always talk about how some software engineers, they're like just kind of they maybe, some of them, not all of them, but the stereotype is they don't have the best people skills, right? And so when you can find that CTO or the engineer who also can relate to other people, manage teams, and understand how what they're doing affects all of the organization from all the different touch points, right? Well, imagine finding a person who's an AI expert and could sit on the board and understand all the nuances of how it affects your company and everything. That's you're looking for needles in the haystack, and being able to have thousands of those people. It's going to be, we'll get there eventually, but it's going to be years and years before that's possible.
It is a tricky thing, because it's like you say, people skills, but there's an experience element too. So there are AI experts out there who might someday make really good board members, but what do they know necessarily about, like, overall corporate strategy, balancing the books, like how does it play into the financials? Because there's been this problem particularly in, like, the diversity world, as Europe has set these standards, India set a standard on having women on board. So India had a thing where there had to be at least one woman on every corporate board, and the next day, and I forget the number, but I'm not exaggerating, this is like 2012, something like 1,100 women were named to corporate boards who were all the wives of the executive chairman on that board.
Oh my God.
But it's the same sort of thing, because in Europe you had an overboarding problem when they implemented quotas, and the quotas were not, you have to have this many women. It was 40% of each gender had to be represented on the board. And all of a sudden you had a lot of women who were on 7, 8, 9 corporate boards, and they were talented, they were experienced, but these companies were having trouble finding other women who had the experience. So it was more of a pipeline problem than an availability problem. I think you see the same thing in AI. But following up on what you said, Ben, about the Kim Kardashian Idris Elba show, which, by the way, I would definitely watch.
It was awesome.
It's like the first episode of the most recent season of Black Mirror, where they don't even know what level of AI they are, but it's all just being generated and they actually believe it. And these are real problems that we're going to have to solve. One person who I thought said some interesting things about it, and granted, we're biased, like, we're in the AI space, it's going to jump out to us. So of course this was our favorite session, was Dr. Valery Nikilev, University of Chicago, who's doing some really amazing things with AI. We talked about what we're doing. He was real fascinated. I'm hoping to get him on the podcast in the next few weeks. But one, so not directly ESG related session that I wanted to give a shout out to is Daniel Guerrero led a session from Broadridge on the evolution of pass-through voting. It is really boring if you're not a nerd in the weeds about it. But what it does is it gives people a lot more say over how their shares are voted when they're held by another entity. So you're talking about like people think BlackRock's controlling the world, and I am a conspiracy theorist all the way, but I don't buy into that one. So BlackRock would be less able to directly influence the overall direction of corporate strategy at companies that are held through BlackRock because the people who actually own the shares would have a lot more say in the voting process.
Mhm.
Well, so following up on that, so
And can I interject? Can I interject there?
Please.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of times, I think it's important to note that a lot of times, the person on the street, the average human being, a lot of times can think profits are evil, companies are evil, they have the worst of intentions, right? But more often than not, when you actually take a look a bit deeper, a lot of times these companies, people, there's a lot of these people, these companies want to do good things, they want to do better for the world. It's case in point, BlackRock creating their own software to allow the people who invest in their ETFs to vote their shares rather than BlackRock voting their shares for them, right? They're doing this on their own. And I know this may paint me as an evil capitalist, but what people don't understand is that a lot of times capital is about supply and demand. If there's a demand and there's a profit to be made from it, they're going to do it. And that's what BlackRock's trying to do in this case. And all the kudos to them for trying to put the power in the people's hands. But at the same time, they're going to try to commercialize it and profit from it, which again, I think all the power to them. Sorry for that little side, but I'm a big fan of capitalism, and I think ESG is very aligned with capitalism if you approach it correctly.
I'm 100% with you. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast. I'm an unapologetic free market capitalist and proud of it.
Yep, me too.
And if we want to solve some of these global problems, I think that's the only way we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Well, okay. So talking global problems, sidetrack a little bit. Nate, what was your favorite drink they made there?
Oh, the old fashioned.
Yeah,
I think that was on point. So
kudos to those bartenders.
Old fashioned. Yeah, they were great.
Woodford
I mean, the Mai Tai we had with Tessa and I think Manish, you and Ben at the end there before we got on our flight. So that wasn't bad, but the old fashioned was the best. So yeah, hands down.
What about you, Ben? Favorite drink?
Well, I'm not like a huge drinker. I'm more of a food person. So I actually really enjoyed the Modelo I had at the Peruvian restaurant we went to one night down, a mile away. I forget the name. I apologize.
That Peruvian restaurant.
I wanted to give you a shout out.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
Anyone who hasn't tried good Peruvian food, they're missing out. It's like a mixture of kind of the native food of that area with Japanese. There's a big Japanese population in Peru, and just it's created this cuisine that's just amazing.
While we're doing the shout outs, I want to give a shout out to the Metropolitan, the hotel we stayed at. It was 2 blocks away from where they did it. The place was 5 stars. It's not a 5-star resort, so I understand what you're getting in, but it was cool. It had a little kitchenette. It was super comfortable. Bed was comfortable. Amenities were amazing. Staff was really friendly. If you are in that area in Long Beach and looking for a place to stay, I highly recommend it. But for favorite drinks, Nate, I'm with you. That old fashioned, and I'm an old fashioned snob, and that was one of the best I've ever had. Those bartenders knew what they were doing, and yeah, the Mai Tai, delicious.
Yes.
And then Tessa ordered that crazy drink with the huma hula hula haba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting old.
Yeah.
You could give me 2 or 3 weeks, I still wouldn't be able to say it.
Me too.
No kidding.
No.
Well, okay. So joking aside, so overall, I mean, I thought it was a great conference. The check-in was smooth. The networking opportunities were just really ideally placed. Like you'd have good sessions, then you'd come in and there'd be a social event, and it was well structured to meet people. You got to talk to the people that did the events, and we accomplished an incredible amount. And I think that's a testament, a good team, but also a very well run conference. But is there anything that you missed? Anything you wanted to do that you didn't get to do while you were there?
Yeah, I wanted to go see there was a session, I don't know the exact name of it, on Japanese activist investing. I thought it was just cool. I mean, it may not be interesting to other people, but I love Japanese culture. My wife is Japanese, my kid's half Japanese, obviously. And from a cultural perspective, it's a culture that has a lot of momentum behind fitting into the crowd, not standing out. So the idea of Japanese activist investors is so interesting to me. Obviously, in every society, there's a diversity of different people with views and how they look at the world. But those are a bunch of people I wanted to meet, because I bet you they were extremely interesting people. Because by nature, you're standing out of the crowd if you're an activist investor. So I thought those people would be probably very interesting.
It is a fascinating governance culture. It's seen maybe more development than any specific entity in terms of governance.
You're saying in Japan, the
Yeah,
governance culture in
yeah.
Japan.
I mean, we think about how much the EU, the US, Australia has been there, but Japan has come from so far. They used to have these really strange structures. They had audit committees that weren't independent, and they've really embraced governance. I think a lot of it's been economic pressure because they sort of had that lull in the 2000s that was pretty unique to Japan, and there's been some adjustment for it. But yeah, I bet it would have been a fascinating conference.
Yeah.
I know for me, there was the one on investing in biodiversity, and I had registered for the one on measuring inequality in corporations. And I was very curious about that because a lot of the metrics that we track, and in fact, we're doing a study on this, but here's some metrics that we think should line up with performance and success, but do they? And how do they? And what other things do they correlate with? And I wanted to check out the inequality one. And then when I saw the biodiversity one, I was like, did I make the right choice? And I don't know. I'm gonna assume that I did, but I don't know. I'll see if I can get the slides for that one or something. What about you, Nate? Anything you wish you had caught?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, I was, working in and out, but I think it was a security litigation update. And I thought, well, I don't know why I want to go to that, but I was trying to figure out what is that litigation that's upcoming or past litigation that was going on. And I think just because I got into that, talking to some of those lawyers to try to figure out what what's coming down the line for ESG, right? For institutional investors in ESG, what are they going to be held to? When the SEC starts to release more guidance around it. So I just thought that'd be interesting to just poke my head in and see what the lawyers are talking about, but was able to join. So
Yeah, it's a huge world. The securities class action space is massive. I got to chat with one of the lawyers for a minute afterwards, and just the progress that they're making in terms of defining some of these things. I guess like when you talk about securities legislation, there's a lot of ambiguity, and obviously you're in a world where we talk about money makes the legal system go. Well, there's both sides have money. Like it's not there's no power player when it's big corporations versus big investors. So some of these legal definitions,
yeah,
I guess, are really starting to make a difference. And we're seeing
well, and then
the last podcast, the ESG space, we talked about it. This is a thing.
that's exactly why I wanted to go. That's what I was going to say. Is our last podcast we are talking about litigation and these groups of students suing the state of Montana, right, for ignoring
With the kids and
environmental concerns in their investments, right? Not even considering it, right? It wasn't the suit was saying you should have at least considered these environmental factors when making decisions for investments. And the state of Montana said, go ahead.
The provision that they passed says you're not allowed to consider them, and so the kids sued to get that taken out.
Right, because even in the state constitution says you should consider future environmental concerns, and so coming off of that podcast we did, I just thought, this would be a good session to pop my head into, but didn't make it, so maybe next time. So.
Yeah, we'll have to reach out to some of the people and get them on there.
Yep.
Well, trying to be respectful of time in this one too, but what's your big takeaway? What did you learn? What did you walk away with? what are you bringing for the rest of the year that you came out of CII and you're feeling good about?
Yeah, I think it reinforces for me what we're doing, that data is important. Reliable data is important. And getting that right so people can make decisions, right? So you want to know where you are as a corporation, where your peers are, where things are moving, and having that data is going to be critical moving forward. So I would say that is what I walked away from. The session with they screened a movie called On Board. It was put on, I think, by Black women on board. That was so fascinating. And I didn't know anything about Patricia Robert Harris, who was the first Black woman on a board of IBM in 1971, and just learning about that history. Never even heard about that. So learned a lot about corporate boards in a way that I had never even considered. And what going back to what you're saying about women on boards and not having enough qualified women, these Black women are saying we need to reach out and widen, because we're getting multiple requests to be on these boards and we just don't have time to do it. And so instead of saying no, what we should be saying is, okay, I can't do it, but here are 3 other people that I know that qualify, and bring those people along. So not just being asked, but lifting up the next cohort in order to widen the pool of people that can serve on board. And I just thought that was powerful and fascinating.
You stole my thunder, Nate. I was gonna give a shout out to Merlene's. I think it's pronounced Saint Hill, who's the co-founder of Black Women on Boards. I thought she was amazing. Without a doubt, she's a trailblazer, and there's something to be said about a trailblazer, just because of the fact they're trailblazing. But I've been in ESG for a long time, and how do I say this? I know that there's a lot of virtue signaling that's happening, a lot of talk that's happening, right? She did something, right? It's not like she's not going to the market and going, hey, let's pass a law to get more Black women on boards. She's not trying to address the problem by passing the buck in some way, shape, or form. She's actually, like Nate said, she with her co-founders, putting together an organization where they are trying to identify and network and create a group of qualified, here's key, very qualified Black women who are successful, competent executives, and they're out there, they exist. But by getting them into a group, making this group aware of board positions that are potentially available, and being a voice for those Black women to say, hey, we're here, we're available, and we have the experience, the capability, and the overall awesomeness to do a great job on these boards. So, and that was inspiring to me. I also, what was in taking it to the next level, I said trailblazing and doing something like that in itself is commendable. But she also seems to be a person who's collaborative and a bridge builder, not a bridge burner. She acknowledged that, hey, this isn't an us versus them thing. She said there's a lot of white people who are collaborative, supportive of this, and have been additive and to this effort. And I think so much of what happens in the what I'll call the dark side of ESG, and if I'm being controversial here, I guess I'm going to be controversial here. There is a dark side to ESG, and that dark side is that it's being politicized and it's being used by people to burn bridges, and to create a us versus them mentality. And at the end of the day, people who are collaborative, who are bridge builders, whether I agree with them on everything or not, I'd much rather be friends or colleagues with someone who I disagree with, who's a bridge builder, rather than someone in general I agree with who's a bridge burner. And she was hands down, clearly a bridge builder. And in fact, she's just doing amazing things. So I thought that was extremely inspiring. So that session with her and she was interviewed by I think the head of stewardship of Goldman Sachs, Catherine Winter. I hope I pronounced her last name right. That's how it's spelled. I thought that was the most inspiring probably 30 minutes of the whole show.
So I'm with y'all. Her like her ability to convey what she went through, her story, and where she is, and how she remained positive, it made it particularly striking. For me, it was actually the sort of very nebulous nature of the ESG market and investing. So I've been doing ESG also for 20 plus years now, and we're starting to get some parameters and identify some priorities, see what investors care about, see where companies are coming from, but they still don't really know either. There's a lot of cohesion around working in the climate space, I think. But even there, it's undefined, and what matters, what's important. Is it absolute? Is it relative greenhouse gas reduction? Is it offsets? Is it finding a carbon market? Which is something that Al is very much involved in. But then with things like biodiversity or the social aspect in terms of governance, it's still very, very new, and it's an exciting time to be involved in it.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Which made being at CII a really cool thing. And I don't know about you all, but I'm looking forward to the spring one already.
Me as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
it'd be great.
absolutely.
Also, get to see you guys again.
Yeah,
So
that's fun too.
Where is the spring one?
The spring one's in DC, so they always do one in DC
okay.
and then one that travels.
It's not in Bali? Come on.
No. Yeah, seriously.
CII, get your game going together. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we'll pass this along to CII to get another one going, and we'll have to see about getting them on the podcast. Ben,
true.
thank you so much for jumping on. Nate,
thank
thank
you guys.
you every time
Appreciate
for
it.
hosting the podcast. Looking
Absolutely,
forward to
man.
continuing this discussion and seeing where it goes. I'm Rob Yates. This is Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates. Signing out.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys later.
All
Bye.
right. Bye, everybody.